This is your lesson on labor market trends. If you open up your book, chapter 9, lesson 1, you can, I don't know, just look through it, and it's definitely long, but a lot of it is just the statistics and numbers that they're giving examples for, so hopefully we can just skip over that in the lesson. In the beginning, they talk about the BLS, or Bureau of Labor Statistics, and basically all that is it's under the United States Department of Labor, and every month they go and talk to households, gather information about the labor force, and they put that together in charts. So anything, here's an example of one, just in case you want to know. But anything, when you look up labor on images and go to Google and stuff, I almost guarantee those charts are going to be source BLS, you know? They're, for the United States, they gather all this information for us to use, and it's very important in things such as the stock market. People follow that very closely. If you want the definition of a labor force, this is important for your quiz. Anyone who's employed or unemployed not in the military. So what if you go to page, let's see, 218, they have a little graph which will also be important. But it gives us the total population. I'll go over this. But it divides up the different groups in our population. What we need to know right now is the difference between unemployed and employed, further definition of those terms. In the labor force, there are the unemployed and the employed. The employed are 16 or older. It's an and/or situation. They worked 1 hour at least in the past week. At least, can you cut that just a moment? I'm getting tongue twisted. Okay. Labor force is anyone who's been employed or employed not in the military. So our labor force is divided into two groups, the employed and the employed. And to tell the difference between those two, you need the definition of what an employed person. To have worked at least 1 hour in the past week, or 15 hours without pay in a family business, or held a job but did not work. So that's like if you're injured or something. Just employed is basically if you have a job, if you want to dumb that down. The information that the BLS gathers answers two questions for us. It's how many people are in the labor force, and then how many people are unemployed and employed in the labor force. So if you go to page 218, you have this chart, and it has the total U.S. population at 301 million. Now this is in 2008, so it's not current, but we have our total population of 301 million people. That's divided into four groups. Your military, which is, if we go previously, our labor force does not include the military, so that's why they're divided out. They have 3 million people in the military. Institutionalized, you have about 1.5 million people institutionalized. I don't know quite if that means jails. I'm unsure. Institutionalized, but I believe that's what it is. They're not in the labor force either. Then you have your non-labor, which would be your children, stay-at-home people. They don't have jobs or anything. And then your labor force, which is what we're focusing on today. And that has our unemployed and our employed. In 2008, it was 142 employed people and 8 million unemployed people. So that's what the BLS gathers for us, is who's employed, who's unemployed, and then total amount of people in the labor market. And that is important for our just analyzing the business and following the economy. Very important in following the economy. Here's another BLS chart. Okay. Once you get past the kind of boring information in the beginning, the book starts talking about trends. Looking through it, I found kind of 3 sections of time in which you can basically divide the change in labor for us. Before the Industrial Revolution. So before Industrial Revolution, as far as you can think, agriculture was the basis for all economies. It was how much food people could produce. Beginning in the 1800s, after the Civil War, that's kicked off the Industrial Revolution, and then labor switched to manufacturing industry. How much goods can we produce? And the reason we can do that is because of advances in technology. If we advance technology in agriculture, we need less people for agriculture. They can move to cities and produce goods and manufacture things in the factories and industries. Good examples in the Industrial Revolution include your Standard Oil by Rockefeller, Carnegie Steel, and Ford. So basically all your robber barons and all of them. That began your Industrial Revolution. So our economy still has that producing and manufacturing labor up until about 1970s when we introduced computers. And then it begins our information age, as you call it, and that switches our economy to a service economy. So as basically before Industrial Revolution, you have a big boom in technology and like industry, and that changes your labor to the manufacturing. And then 1970s, you develop electronics and computers. That changes the economy or the time to an information age, and then we have a labor change in the service economy, producing services instead of goods. If you want to kind of look at this again, it takes 15, if you look at this picture, it takes 15 men to run this thresher. Advances in technology combines a thresher into a reaper, and you have a combine. And it takes one man, if even that, because of advances in GPS, and again, that's your computers and stuff. And so now you have 14 men, and what are they going to do? They're going to go to the cities and produce goods, or like in this picture, help serve people building. So as technology advances, you switch your labor. I'm doing an essay in Mrs. Lewis's class on robots, and I believe robots will play a big role in the future as far as labor changes. We'll have a lot of robots doing the manufacturing instead of humans. Another trend in the labor market is outsourcing and offshoring. Outsourcing is more contracting a company and saying, hey, can you build this for me, even though that company themselves could do it. So if it's more efficient for another company to do it, why not just pay them to do it than build it yourself? The best example I have for this is Apple. I don't know if you know this, but Apple doesn't make their own phones. They send it over to Foxconn, who makes the actual phone, and then Apple sells them. So Apple is basically just designing a product, having it made by someone else, and then they get to sell it. That's the best example of outsourcing. Offshoring is moving operations to another country. The reason we can do this, and the reason it's becoming a trend, is because of transportation. I don't think a company would find it very efficient to offshore when they're using wooden ships, but now when we have planes that can cross the world in hours and stuff, it definitely makes sense. If it's better to move a company somewhere where there's less regulation, then a company can do that. And then, I don't know, if you could pause the video and maybe talk as a class about offshoring, offsourcing, what different companies are doing this, and the different effects it has on us. It definitely has an effect on us when you talk about jobs in China. Education. This plays an important role in our labor, and if you don't pay attention to anything else in this presentation, I'd pay attention to this graph. Now I don't think you can read it, but there's another graph on page 220, and it basically is showing the amount of education people have and the average income they receive. Right here, I can't read that. I'll use the graph on page 220. It says without a high school education, people are earning like less than 40,000 a year as a annual earnings. As you go across the graph, you can see a steady raise until professional, and then it drops to doctorate just because I feel like there is less people with doctorate degrees, and that affects averaging and stuff. But it just shows how an increase in education will probably increase the annual amount of income you receive. The reason for this, people studying economics and all this have come up with two ideas. The first is called the learning effect. It's basically common understanding. The more education I have, the better I'll be at producing something, and that increases wages. Now, people's gonna pay more if you can do more. And then the second effect is the screening effect, which is basically kind of a theory of saying, if this person is willing to go through college and education and do all this stuff, 4 years, 10 years of learning and stuff, they definitely show the skills to be a good employee, and so I'm gonna hire them. That just shows how education is changing our labor. If you think about the offshoring, ties into offshoring, because as we do less skilled jobs to foreign countries, the people that would do those jobs in this country have to go back to school, get a higher education to do skills like programming and electronics and stuff, where putting something together would not be as hard to do. Then jump in your textbook, it jumps from the education of workers and labor to women at work. We've definitely seen an increase in women in the labor force, and the reasons for this is education. As women get education, they're seen more in the labor force, and then transfer to a service economy, where in agriculture and industry, in that agriculture and industrial revolution and all this, labor was mostly physical labor. Women couldn't really help, and it was predominantly men. But now with the service economy, it's based on education, which women can do equally as well. And so we're seeing more women in those jobs. Another topic trending is temporary workers. Talk about job security. These people has a job year in, year out. Temporary workers, it's based on the contracting or the season. I put a picture of a ski resort just because people can only ski during the winter unless it's always snowing somewhere. But those people working the ski resort, they need employees in the winter, but they don't need them in the summer. No reason to pay someone who's not going to work during the summer. So that would be an example of temporary employment. But it also explains that other jobs like attorneys and software engineers, those jobs are becoming more temporal because of, for a couple of reasons. But employers don't want to hire someone for a long time when they can just hire them once, have them do their job, and then let them go. And that's one of the reasons for temporary. The flexibility of the worker and company. If I can just hire someone to do this real quick and then let them go, it's a lot more efficient for me as hiring those people and the worker, because they can do their job, get paid pretty well for just that small amount of work that they do for someone, and then go to someone else and work. So costs are cut, and then discharging temporary workers is easier because of the pay. When you fire or let someone go that has been working for you for like a pretty secure job, the companies have to give them a pay for their time off, pay them as they let go. I don't know if you see this in Cabela's, as they lay off people, they gave them some money just to live off of until they find another job. So temporary jobs, you don't have to do that. You can just, you don't have to pay them, and that cuts costs again for the employer. And then some workers actually prefer this, but then the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, finds opposite information, which I don't understand quite. Foreign workers is definitely having an impact on our economy and labor. Guest workers, I'm sure you know, it's right in the name, workers that come from another country that work for us in the US and they're allowed to live there. Problems with guest workers is they're not from here and people worry about their jobs being taken away. All this is who's getting what jobs if you think about it. Employers, to have a guest worker, the employer has to show to the United States that first the employer cannot function without these guest workers, that it needs them basically. Without them they would fail, and then by hiring these guest workers it's not affecting the native workers and their wages and that. It's a hot issue, but if you think about your supply and demand again, I put a graph up there. The increase in supply will decrease the demand, right? So as we get more and more workers, there's less demand, and so they don't have to pay workers as much because, hey, there's a lot of them. If this person's not going to accept the wages, I can go hire this person. So that's where foreign workers becomes kind of difficult, when they can accept low wages and take our jobs. So it's definitely debated in the US. You can talk about, pause the video again if you want to talk about that. And then I think my last point is wages. Wages in the labor. With a fixed job, you have fixed wages. Now the problem with that is economy is basically always inflating a little bit, and so in practicality your wages are losing their buying power, so practically your wages are decreasing. I don't know if that makes sense, but another reason for decreasing wages is the increase of labor supply. So that's again your supply and demand, except with more people to work. It doesn't necessarily have to be foreign workers, it can be anyone. Benefits cost a lot for employers. The other reason for wages going down is benefits. Benefits cost a lot for employers. I mean, some of the more common ones include insurance, pension, breaks, company cars, like this awesome Oscar Mayer fleet right there. Discounts in education. That costs a lot for an employer. I mean, it costs a lot for us, but if you can imagine an employer having to pay all this for the people, it costs a lot, and so they take away from your wages when they do that sometimes. So I don't know, common theme or trend we're seeing is decreasing wages, kind of. I wouldn't say that for all occasions, but at least in 2008 it was.